Good morning, and we are ENDURO Business Jets. I'd like to take a moment and thank the panel for being here today and everyone in the audience as well. Throughout this presentation, we'll be referring to the screen above me as the primary screen and the screen over here as the secondary screen. This presentation will cover the preliminary design of the ER-19. The ER-19 is a mid-sized business jet that will be ETOPS certified. On the secondary screen, you can see a render of our aircraft. My name is Noah Cruzy. I'm the design team lead. EJ Ballesteros worked on CATIA, Jordan Bramblett, Aerodynamics, Morgan Valiant, Stability and Controls, Ali Hess, Propulsion, Hugo Lara, Structures and Landing Gear, Chad Penrod, Weight and Balance, and Margarita Babinova, CATIA work and Performance Verification. On the secondary screen, you will see an overview of today's presentation. I will be now going over the need for the ER-19. On the primary screen, you will see our appeal to market. Business jets are a great way for businesses or companies to save time and money. And this is because you don't have to wait in those long lines for checking in bags, going through security, and boarding the plane. It also helps save money because rather than being restricted by the time flights set by airlines take off, you can travel at any time you'd like. This kind of goes into the increased mobility. There are also currently in the United States about 5,000 regional airports and only 500 international or commercial airports. That means that there is a large market out there to service regional airports. Also, business jets are a great way to improve productivity. And this is because you're in a private environment, it's quiet, you're most likely with coworkers, you can collaborate with each other, and if you're working on sensitive or confidential information, you're in an environment in which you can do so. On the secondary screen, you will see the classes of business jets we looked at. We looked at mid-size and super mid-size business jets. Mid-size jets can hold 5 to 10 passengers. They have a shorter range, but they are able to take off or operate from regional airports. Super mid-size business jets can carry more passengers. They have a further range, and this is because of the increase in fuel weight. However, they are unable to take off from these regional airports due to that increase in fuel. The ER-19 will fulfill a gap in between these two categories, being a mid-sized business jet with the range capabilities of a super-sized mid-sized jet. On the primary screen, you will see some of our mission specifications. Important ones to point out are that we are required to take off from a 5,000-foot runway and exceed a range of 2,500 nautical miles. This 2,500 nautical miles comes from our RFP requirement of flying from a 5,000-foot runway from any of the 3 West Coast states to and from Hawaii. We also must be able to cruise at a speed of Mach 0.78. On the secondary screen, you will see our mission requirements. We have to satisfy the FAA requirements as well as ETOPS requirements. On the primary screen, you will see the FAA 60-minute rule. This rule is set by the FAA for twin-engine aircraft, which limits them from flying 60 minutes away, or which limits them within a 60-minute radius of an adequate airport along their flight path. This makes flights from the West Coast to Hawaii impossible. Note that the light blue area is where an aircraft would be within 60 minutes of an adequate airport. The dark blue area is where it would exceed that range. On the secondary screen, you will see the ETOPS 180-minute rule. This was granted by the FAA as the reliability of engines has increased over the years. And it states that if an aircraft can fly 180 minutes from an adequate airport, allowing for flights from the West Coast to Hawaii. During these flights, there is a critical point at which the aircraft is the furthest distance time-wise from an adequate airport. If an engine were to fail at this point, the aircraft would safely be able to divert or continue on to its final destination. Note that the circles do overlap, which does indicate that the aircraft would be able to satisfy an ETOPS 180-minute flight. Next up is EJ with mission and aircraft description.
Thank you, Noah. So on the primary screen, you can see the mission profile for the ER-19. So it'll start off in takeoff, up into climb. It'll climb to our cruise altitude. From the cruise altitude, it'll descend into possible loiter, approach, and land. In an unlikely event of an engine failure at the critical point in the cruise phase, Due to its ETOPS capabilities, the ER-19 will be able to safely land at an alternate airport or finish its intended mission. On the primary screen, you can see a similar aircraft that we based the ER-19's initial performance parameters. So it's the Bombardier Learjet 70, the Gulfstream G150, and the Cessna Citation XLS Plus. On the secondary screen, you can see the performance parameters of those similar aircraft as compared to the ER-19's performance parameters. The green check marks indicate that the performance parameter does satisfy the RFP requirement. So none of the similar aircraft fulfills all of the RFP requirements, whereas the ER-19 does, and the ER-19 does have ETOPS capabilities as well. On the primary screen, you can see a 3 view of the ER-19. Note that all of these dimensions are in inches. On the secondary screen is the dimensions of the nose and the fuselage. So the fuselage is designed to fit the structural alignment as well as the cabin, and the cabin is designed to fit 8 passengers, with each passenger carrying at least 50 pounds of carry-on luggage. The cockpit is designed to fit two pilots, so a pilot and a co-pilot. It is sized based on the symmetry of the fuselage, and it is based off similar aircraft as well. On the primary screen, you can see the pilot field of view. So the lateral and horizontal field of view does satisfy FAR 25 guidelines, and it is designed to give the pilots the best visibility as possible. On the secondary screen is a rendered picture of the flight deck. Primary screen, you can see the cabin configuration. So once you board the aircraft, you can see the cockpit and the baggage area. There is a conference suite, so the conference suite is designed to accommodate for an in-flight conference for up to 4 passengers. As you walk through the aircraft, there'll be 4 more seats, so the ER-19 does hold up to 8 passengers. On the cabin configuration, the emergency exits and the lavatory is labeled as well. On the secondary screen is just the dimensions of the interior. So there is a step-down floor to easily maneuver your way through the aircraft, and the dimensions are also based on comfortability when you are boarded on the aircraft as well. Next is wing layout and drag buildup with Jordan.
Thank you, EJ. On the primary screen, you can see the wing layout for the ER-19. These dimensions are in inches. On the secondary screen, you can see our wing parameters. The ER-19 has a leading edge sweep of 22 degrees. We gave it a 22-degree leading edge sweep because it will delay the onset of the critical Mach number, decreasing our drag at cruise, and it is a low enough number to allow us to have enough lift to take off and land from a 5,000-foot runway. We chose a taper ratio of 0.3 because we needed a long enough root chord to put our landing gear as far back as possible to satisfy our longitudinal tip-over angle. And we chose a thickness ratio of 12% because it will be thick enough for us to include structures and fuel, and it's thin enough to decrease drag for all our phases. On the primary screen, you can see the winglets that we chose for the ER-19. All these dimensions are in inches. On the secondary screen, you can see our winglet parameters. Our winglets effectively increase our aspect ratio from 8 to 9.5, and it favorably affects our drag and lift coefficients. On the primary screen, you can see the airfoil we chose for the ER-19. We chose a NACA 64-412. This is because it has a low drag coefficient and because it will give us enough lift to take off without flaps. On the secondary screen, you can see our 2D airfoil and 3D wing lift curves. On the primary screen, you can see our lift curves for Mach 0.2 and Mach 0.8. It is important to note that our lift curve slope increases from Mach 0.2 to Mach 0.8. On the primary screen, you can see the flap choice we chose for the ER-19. We chose a slotted flap. This is because it is well documented and it will give us enough lift for landing. On the secondary screen, you can see our 3D lift curves with and without flaps. During landing, we will land at an angle of attack of about 8 degrees. On the primary screen, you can see our VN diagrams. The top and bottom most constraining lines are the load limits. These were taken from the CFR requirements. The CFR requirements state that transport aircraft cannot exceed 3 Gs in the positive, and the negative load limit has to be 40% of this positive load limit. So we chose 2.5 and -1. The Q limits, which are the rightmost constraining lines, were taken from our thrust available, thrust required plots. For sea level, our Q limit is 672 knots, and for 40,000 feet, our Q limit is 459 knots. On the primary screen, you can see our parasite drag buildup. To start the parasite drag buildup, we had to find the wetted area components. This was done using CATIA. After the wetted area components were found, the parasite drag was calculated to be 0.0104. This is not the final value. On the secondary screen, you can see the parasite drag additions that we had to make. This was due to the drag from leakage and perturbances, the cockpit, the empennage upsweep, and the windshield. After these drags were added up, the total parasite drag was calculated to be 0.0172. Next, we had to find the total drag. This was done by adding the induced drag and the parasite drag. On the primary and secondary screen shows the total drag for sea level and 40,000 feet. Next will be Morgan with empennage design and S&C analysis.
Thank you, Jordan. So, to begin designing the empennage for the ER-19, we had to choose a configuration. On the primary screen is our reasoning for choosing a high tail configuration, which was to clear the horizontal tail of the engine nacelles, which also reduced downwash felt by the horizontal tail, which improved its efficiency, and it's a well-documented design that's very easy to analyze from a stability controls perspective. And on the secondary screen is a rendering of the final empennage design. On the primary screen is our sizing similar aircraft for our initial estimate. These were sized based on aircraft to similar planform areas and roles, so similar business jets. And this was done using Roscom's tail volume ratio method, which takes the volume of any empennage component and normalizes it by the wing area, the wingspan, and its position on the aircraft. The initial sizing based on this method made the empennage very large, as you can see on the secondary screen, with a vertical tail area of 85 square feet and a horizontal tail area of 105 square feet. Note that on the picture, none of the control surfaces are sized because they were subject to change when we analyzed the empennage based on our static stability parameters. On the primary screen, our longitudinal X-plot for Mach 0.2. With a horizontal tail area of 45 square feet, we have a static margin of about 9.3%. And on the secondary screen, we have a longitudinal X-plot of Mach 0.8, which came out to about 6.7%. The reason we did it on Mach 0.2, Mach 0.8 is to observe how our aerodynamic center changed as the Mach number increased, because the aerodynamic center location is a function of the Mach number. On the primary screen is our directional X-plot for sizing the vertical tail. We chose a design value of Cn beta, the coefficient of gamma due to side slip, of 0.0015 per degree, as opposed to the typical 0.001 per degree, to give us enhanced directional stability in an engine out scenario. With this value, we get a vertical tail area of 41.5 square feet. On the secondary screen is the final layout of the empennage with a vertical tail area of 41.5 square feet and a horizontal tail area of 45 square feet. Note that on this drawing, the control surfaces are included. On the primary screen is a drawing of a horizontal tail. Note the leading edge of 22 degrees to match the wing. On the secondary screen are horizontal tail parameters. We chose a NACA 0012 airfoil for the horizontal tail because it's symmetrical airfoil, and the 12% thickness gives us enough elevators to build, or enough elevator authority to be able to pitch at various phases of flight, and it's thin enough to not have a whole lot of drag at cruise. which has an aspect ratio of 5 for the horizontal tail based on similar aircraft, and an incidence angle of -1 degree, so pointing downward, to offset the pitching moment, the downward pitching moment that comes from the position of the engines at cruise. On the primary screens, drawing of a vertical tail. The most significant part of this is to note that the horizontal tail placement is at the top based on our configuration. On the secondary screen, our vertical tail parameters, for which we chose an ACA 0012 airfoil for the same reasons. We have an aspect ratio of 2.4 for the vertical tail, and a taper ratio of 0.67 based on similar aircraft. We determined that the ER-19 is static stable in flight based on static stability criteria shown on the primary screen. On the primary screen is our rudder design, after we determined that the ER-19 was statically stable. This was done based on an engine out scenario without the aid of ailerons, so without the aid of ailerons making a stability and roll. With a deflection of 15 degrees at max thrust at both of those altitudes, sea level and 40,000 feet, we have enough excess deflection to be able to yaw the aircraft the opposite direction. On the secondary screen, our rudder parameters, we included the maximum downward deflection of the elevator to show that the rudder and the elevator will not clash at the maximum deflections. We chose a 40% chord for the rudder based on a trade study for which we kept the angle of deflection constant and changed the percent chord to increase the area until we got about 15 degrees of deflection to stabilize the aircraft, so we knew we had excess deflection if we needed it. We have a max deflection of 30 degrees for the rudder based on the designs of similar aircraft. On the primary screens, our elevator design, this was designed based on the moments necessary to pitch at various phases of flight. Also shown are the deflections at each phase of flight. The most constricting one is sea level takeoff, which has a deflection of -20 degrees, so deflecting upward. On the secondary screen, our elevator parameters, we have a percent chord of the elevator of 33%, also based on a trade study when we changed the area of the elevator until we had enough pitch stability at takeoff. We have max deflection upward of 25 degrees for the elevator and max deflection downward of 15 degrees based on designs of similar aircraft as well. On the primary screen is our aileron design. This was based on counteracting the rolling moment that comes from the vertical tail and rudder in an engine out scenario. With the highest side slip predicted of 10 degrees, which is the response of the pilot when he realizes the engine goes out and yaws the aircraft back straight, was 15 degrees at sea level and 16 degrees at 40,000 feet. On the secondary screen are aileron parameters. We chose a percent chord of 25% to fit behind the rear spar, which is 33% away from the trailing edge, and a max deflection of 25 degrees based on similar aircraft designs. We have a percent chord of 25%. We determined that was good enough with our aileron length of about 9 feet. On the primary screen is our horizontal tail lift curve. With a max elevator deflection of 25 degrees as stated before, we have a stalling angle of attack of about 11 degrees. At sea level takeoff, we determined that the angle of attack on the horizontal tail, including the incidence angle, was about 10 degrees, so in our most stringent case, the horizontal tail will not stall. On the secondary screen is our vertical tail lift curve. We have a stalling angle of attack of about 11 degrees with maximum rudder, which whether or not the horizontal tail will stall is based on the input of the pilot. On the primary screen is an engine out scenario at 40,000 feet. With the forces shown on the picture, we have a minimum control speed of 150 knots. Based on the speed that we'll be cruising at, initially when the engine goes out, we will not lose control of the aircraft. Also note the control surface deflections in this scenario. Note that all the deflections are less than the maximum control surface. On the secondary screen is our engine out scenario at sea level. We also have a minimum control speed of about 120 knots, for which we'll be landing at about 130 knots, so we won't lose control at sea level landing. And note the control surface deflections are also less than their maximums. On the primary screen is our takeoff rotation at sea level, for which we use to size the elevator. Note all the forces on the picture that create moments about the main gear to pitch the aircraft. On the secondary screen are rotation values. We have a rotation speed of 127 knots, which is greater than the minimum control speed and stall speed, so we won't lose control and we won't stall at sea level takeoff. With this, we have a rotation angle of 6 degrees and a pitch rate of 2.9 degrees per second. Now I'll hand it off to Allie for propulsion system and drag pulling.
Thank you, Morgan. In choosing the propulsion system for the ER-19, we first looked at the aircraft needs. The thrust-to-weight ratio was found from the design point. This gave us a total thrust required for takeoff of about 9,000 pounds. We chose to use 2 engines to satisfy our ETOPS requirement. We wanted to be fuel efficient during cruise, as cruise is our longest phase of flight due to the long range. Also, we wanted a low dry weight of the engine to keep the total weight of the aircraft down. On the secondary screen is the family of engines that we looked at, the Allison AE3007 family. We chose the C1 model due to the increased thrust at sea level and the low weight. We also chose a high bypass ratio turbofan with a bypass ratio of 5.3. On the primary screen is the C1 model specifications with the ER-19 requirements. The weight requirement was supposed to be less than 2,000 pounds per engine, which we satisfy. We chose this to keep the total weight of the aircraft down. The thrust at sea level requirement was found again from the design space. Bypass ratio needed to be higher than 5 in order to classify it as a high bypass ratio turbofan. These bypass ratio turbofans are very efficient during cruise, which is important for our long range. We also wanted a fuel efficiency less than 0.7 so that we could be fuel efficient during our long phases. On the secondary screen is the C1 model installed on a similar aircraft. On the primary screen are the installation losses and power takeoff estimates. We estimated the inlet and nozzle installation losses to be 2% and 1% respectively. These were taken from Mattingly's Elements of Propulsion textbook. We estimated power takeoff to be 5%, giving us a total loss of 8%. On the secondary screen is the nacelle design sizing with a side and front view of the nacelle. The fan diameter is similar to the inlet diameter. On the primary screen is the thrust available, thrust required plot at sea level. Notice that we do have plenty of piece of S and space between the thrust required and thrust available plots to be able to fly at almost any velocity. On the primary screen is the fuel usage mission analysis for an optimal flight of the ER-19. The cruise phase uses the most fuel, which is not surprising due to our long range. We also have included reserves for a 30-minute loiter if necessary. This gives us a total fuel usage of about 6,700 pounds of fuel. On the secondary screen is the thrust available, thrust required plot at 40,000 feet, or our cruising altitude. Taking a tangent line from the origin to the total drag plot, we found our max range cruise velocity to be 400 knots. At this velocity, we have enough piece of S to be able to fly here. On the primary screen is a mission of fuel analysis of the one engine inoperative at the critical point. This engine failure is a seized engine. We broke the cruise phase into before and after failure. We found that the cruise phase after failure uses about 1.5 times more fuel than before the failure. This gives us a total fuel usage of about 7,500 pounds of fuel. On the secondary screen is the thrust available, thrust required plot at 20,000 feet, which will be our cruising altitude for one engine inoperative. Taking a tangent line again from the origin to the total drag plot, we found a max range cruise velocity of 275 knots. However, this was too slow to satisfy our ETOPS requirement, and therefore we will be flying at 343 knots. At this velocity, we also have enough piece of S to be able to fly here. On the primary screen is the nacelles installed on the empennage of the ER-19. They were installed on the empennage to increase ground clearance, decrease foreign object damage, as well as decrease noise within the cabin. The CG of the aircraft is below the thrust line of the engines. This will create a nose down moment during flight. However, this was taken into account during stability and control. On the secondary screen are the nacelles installed on a rendering of the ER-19. Next up, we have structural and landing gear design with Hugo.
Thank you, Ellie. On the primary screen, we have the wing structural layout. We use a conventional wing torque box for the wing, comprised of front, rear spar, ribs, and wing skin. The ribs are placed there to prevent crippling of the wing skin during the flight. So the front and rear spar was placed at 15 to 70% of the core. This is to allow enough room in between the spars for fuel storage. In addition, the rear spar was placed at 70% to allow for enough platform area for those high lift devices. In addition, we placed our rib spacing at 24 inches which is similar to aircraft of the same weight and size. On the secondary screen, we have our empennage structural layout, with our vertical tail and horizontal tail being comprised of, again, wing torque box. Our front and rear spars for the vertical tail will place at 15% of the chord and 60% of the chord, with our horizontal tail spars placed at 15 and 66% of the chord. These rear spars replace the hinge lines for the rudder and the elevator, respectively. Again, we have a rib spacing of 24 inches. As noted, there are bulkheads underneath those front and rear spars for the vertical tail, so that the loads can be transmitted into the fuselage and save weight with structural synergisms. On the primary screen, we have fuselage structural layout. We use a conventional bulkhead and longeron setup, with bulkheads being spaced 24 inches down the fuselage and a longeron space radially along the fuselage. The longerons transmit the bending loads throughout the fuselage, and the bulkheads withstand the pressure loading throughout the cycle of the aircraft. On the secondary screen, we have the engine mounts of the ER-19. We have 2 engine mounts, forward and rear, comprised of 2 beams connecting both of the engines, with engine support frames that secure the engine to the aircraft. The front engine mount is used to bear the load of the weight of the engine, as well as the thrust loading during takeoff and landing. The aft engine support is to withstand the vibrational loading and keep the direction of the engine going forward on the aircraft. On the primary screen, we have our material selection for each aircraft component. For the skin, we chose an aluminum 2024 T3. This is due to its high fatigue, being able to withstand fatigue, cycling. For our spars, ribs, bulkheads, and longerons, we chose a stronger aluminum 7075. The T73 is a castable aluminum, which brings down manufacturing costs, and is also, again, stronger than the 2024. Both of these aluminums are resistant to corrosion, which is important for the ER-19. The engine mounts and firewalls were chosen to be stainless steel. The reason why it's stainless steel is because this type of steel is, again, resistant to corrosion, and because steel can withstand higher temperatures than aluminum. Next, we have landing gear. We chose titanium for these landing gear because the titanium has a higher strength to weight ratio than the aluminum and can withstand these high temperatures of steel, which the landing gear will experience high pressure loading and dynamic loading during landing and takeoff. In addition, titanium is really expensive, so we minimize the use of titanium for the aircraft. For the windshield, we chose plexiglass as it has high tensile strength. On the secondary screen, we have the ER-19's airframe. On the primary screen, we have the main gear retraction. As identified, the cabin floor and the wing spar locations were taken into account when storing the gear. 2 stowage doors cover the main gear and deploy and retract during landing and takeoff. On the secondary screen, we have our nose gear. It is important to note that the nose gear retracts forward into the nose. In the event of an actuator failure, the pilots can pull the nose gear, and due to drag, the nose gear will lock into place for a safe landing. It's also important to note that the main gear and the nose gear operate on separate mechanisms, so in the event that the main gear malfunction rejects it from deploying, the nose gear can be kept in the cabin, in the fuselage, excuse me, and a level landing can be executed. On the primary screen, we have our landing gear locations. The nose gear is placed at 13 feet from the nose, and the main gear at 34 feet from the nose. The nose gear was placed at 13 feet from the nose to allow enough steering authority while on the ground, and the main gear was placed at that rear wing spar to direct the loads into the aircraft frame. On the primary screen, we have our longitudinal tip-over angle. This is the angle made by the aftmost center of gravity location of the aircraft with the main gear. This is 16 degrees. FAR 25 requires we have at least 15 degrees, which we satisfy. On the secondary screen, we have our lateral tip-over angle, and this is the angle made by the line from the nose and the main gear with the center of gravity. For land-based aircraft, a degree of at least 63, no more than 63 degrees is required, which we satisfy at 59-degree lateral tip-over angle. On the primary screen, we have our longitudinal ground clearances, which is made by the bowsprit point on the empennage with the main gear. FAR 25 requires at least 15 degrees, which we satisfy with 22-degree longitudinal ground clearance. On the secondary screen, we have the lateral ground clearance of the aircraft, which is the lowest point on the wing, made with the main landing gear. The ER-19 has 11-degree lateral ground clearance angle, which satisfies our at least 5-degree angle. Next, we have weight and balance analysis with Chad.
Thanks, Hugo. On the primary screen is the weight and balance analysis of the ER-19. To conduct the weight and balance analysis of our aircraft, the individual components' weights and center of gravity locations were calculated. Based on similar aircraft, Rossum's method was used to estimate the center of gravity locations and the weights of the fuselage, empennage, nacelles, wing, and landing gear. The rest of the components on the aircraft, their weights were calculated based off of research, and their center of gravity locations were calculated based on the configuration of our aircraft. On the secondary screen is the average center, or the total center of gravity location of the ER-19. On the primary screen are the critical center of gravity locations of the ER-19. The most aft center of gravity location is at empty weight, and the most forward is at empty weight with crew, maximum passengers, and bags on board. Also note the aerodynamic centers for Mach 0.2 and 0.8 are shown. And you can also note that we do actually meet the longitudinal tip over angle with those center of gravities shown. On the secondary screen, the excursion plot for the ER-19 is shown. At the very bottom is the empty weight center of gravity location, which is our most aft. Then, when the crew boards the plane, this moves our center of gravity forward to our operational empty weight. Then, when the fuel is loaded onto the aircraft, shifting our center of gravity more aft. And then, when the passengers and bags are loaded onto the plane, this finally brings us to our takeoff weight there at the very top. Then, when we take off, we burn all our fuel. This shifts our center of gravity to our most forward location at our operational empty weight with passengers and bags on board. Then when we land and the passengers and bags are removed from the plane, this brings us back to our operational empty weight. Also note the aerodynamic centers for Mach 0.2 and 0.8 are shown. And you can also see that throughout the phases of flight, we do maintain a positive static margin. On the primary screen is our design space, with the final estimate for our takeoff weight of 22,495 pounds. You can see that we still fit within our design space. Up next, we have verification of mission performance with Margarita.
Thank you, Chad. To find the minimum runway length required for our aircraft, we calculated the takeoff field length for ER-25. This is shown on the primary screen. This length is defined as the total takeoff distance at which, after an engine failure, the distance to abort takeoff and come to a complete stop exactly equals the distance to continue taking off on the remaining engine and clear a 35-foot obstacle. This was found to be 4,517 feet. It was also important to find the critical velocity V1. So if an engine failure occurs before the aircraft reaches this velocity, the pilots will know to abort takeoff and stop the aircraft. While if an engine fails at a higher velocity, the aircraft will be able to safely continue taking off and clear the 35-foot obstacle at the end of the runway. The secondary screen shows the landing field length. This length is 1.67 times the landing distance per ER-25, and this is to account for the possibility of variations in approach speed, touchdown point, or any other deviations from standard procedure. The primary screen shows the stall and takeoff speeds required by ER-25. These apply to the stall speed, the critical velocity at takeoff, and the rotation velocity, and the ER-19 satisfies these requirements. The primary screen shows the performance requirements as described previously. We do meet all of these requirements as we can take off and land from runways of 5,000 feet or longer. We do have a range of 30 to 87 feet, and we have the ability to cruise at Mach 0.8. The secondary screen shows the design specifications required by the RFP. The ER-19 was configured to these specifications and does meet all of them. Another requirement for our aircraft is that we are to be ETOPS certified. The primary screen shows the ETOPS map for our aircraft. The light blue area represents areas where there is an adequate airport within 180 minutes flying time at our one engine and operative speed. Since our flight path does lie within the area, that means we are able to be ETOPS certified. The secondary screen shows a zoomed out version of the same map. As you can see, ETOPS certification does give us the capability of flying anywhere in the world. Next up is Noah with market analysis.
Thanks, Margarita. On the primary screen, you can see the cost of the ER-19. This was broken up into two categories, the RDT&E, so research, development, testing, and evaluation, and the production cost. We also calculated the price to sell the ER-19. This was based off Raymer's calculation of an $800 per pound fraction. That gives us a price of just under $18 million. We are required to fulfill a 200 unit purchase from our RFP requirement, and this gives us a net income of just over $1 billion. It is also important to note that our break-even point is 94 aircraft, so at that point we will begin making a profit. On the secondary screen is our life cycle cost of the ER-19. This is for one aircraft over a 20-year life cycle. It takes into account the fuel cost, crew cost, and our maintenance cost. Those are the direct operating costs as shown, which is the most expensive, and then our indirect costs account for depreciation, the insurance on the aircraft, as well as the disposal of the aircraft at the end of the 20-year life cycle. I'll be going over our labor costs and labor and costs next. On the primary screen are our team hours, and they are above the planned hours set forth at the beginning of the semester. And on the secondary screen are our labor costs for our hours logged and our cost breakdown. Note that the most time spent and cost spent was in engineering and professional development. For our conclusions and recommendations, ENDURO concludes that we satisfy our FAA and ETOPS requirements. We satisfy all of our RFP requirements so we can take off and land from a 5,000-foot runway. We have a range over 2,500 nautical miles, and we are able to cruise at Mach 0.78. Based on these conclusions, our recommendations are that we begin our test and evaluation. This will be validated with wind tunnel tests from a model. And with that, I'd like to thank you again for being here today and open up the floor for questions.
Okay. Looks like we've got 15 minutes or so for questions.
All right, so that's like 10 questions
That means
each.
everybody else gets 1 minute, right?
Okay, yeah, got it, okay. All right, so starting out, great job. Specifically, I wrote down really clean slides. I really appreciated that. Also, thank you for putting your team name, like whoever was presenting in the upper left-hand corner of your slide. That was I like that. Okay, so a couple questions because that's my job. What is your cruise Mach number? Is it 7.8 or is it 8.0?
Neither.
Wait, okay, help me out.
So, I'm sorry, that wasn't clear. So we are required to cruise at Mach 0.78 or higher.
Okay.
And we can cruise, our max cruise velocity is Mach 0.8. However, to get our max range velocity, we won't be cruising at that because it's not fuel efficient.
Okay, so
Does that answer your question?
so what speed are you gonna cruise at?
400 knots.
Okay, got it. And I guess I'll have to figure out the Mach number
That's
somewhere.
0.7.
Okay, sounds good. So if you want to go at 7.8 or 8.0, do you not meet your ETOPS at that point, or like? What happens when we start going too fast? Is there actually an impact to the operational use?
So the 0.78 is for all engines operating. We are 0.8 as well, so we can reach speeds of Mach 0.8.
Right.
However, that's not our most fuel efficient.
Okay.
So we would burn more fuel. Our
Right.
most fuel efficient is Mach 0.7.
Okay, so you're planning and you meet all your ETOPS requirements and that sort of thing at 0.7.
0.7 is based on the 343 knots, which is under Mach 0.7. I believe it's Mach 0.58, and that's what satisfies our ETOPS requirement.
Okay, so are you cruising at 5.8 or are you cruising at
For one
7?
engine and operative, we will cruise at
Okay.
Mach 0.58.
All right. So it was a little unclear. It sounds like there's about 4-ish numbers that might be the number. The reason that I was cued off is slide 19A says Mach 0.78. and then side 61 says Mach 0.8. And so it was that I saw there was a little delta. It was either 0.8 or 0.78. I couldn't quite tell. But the Mach 0.7 was, that would probably be a helpful number to hit on, since that's what you're actually planning to be at. Okay, kind of a question going down a similar vein, and this might help you go faster. Why? So it seems like efficiency is going to be important for you guys. So how did you select your winglets? How did you decide what, cant angle, airfoil, that sort of thing? And kind of a little bit of a similar question, how did you decide that the wing airfoil, I think it was a 6 series, why did you choose that one? It looks like you guys are cruising in probably kind of that transonic region where maybe supercritical airfoil might be useful, but I don't know. You guys did the design.
So that's, 2 people can answer that. For the winglets, I'll have Margarita, and then for the airfoil, we'll have Jordan answer that.
So for the winglets, there isn't really that much information out there. So the height was based on similar aircraft, but the angles were based on research from wind tunnel test data, which gave the best drag and lift values. And then those were calculated from a textbook.
Yeah, okay, got it. So I guess my thought is because the winglets are going to make you more efficient, you might be able, instead of adding that manufacturing complexity, unless it's cool and you want it to have winglets for that reason, you might be able to save it with a different wing airfoil. So I guess kind of part 2 of the question is, how did you choose your wing airfoil, or why did you go with that one?
So we chose the wing airfoil from the I forget his last name. The theory of airfoil sections.
Yep.
And we looked through it and we tried to find the one that had the lowest drag coefficient and the high enough lift coefficient so that we could take off on the 5,000-foot runways.
Okay.
So
it was kind of a menu using it in Van Notenhof and then just whatever the one was that worked from there. Okay. Yeah, that works. Conceptually, you can try to think a little bit about some of the more advanced airfoils. Remember that book came out in like 1940 something. So there might have been some advances in technology since then. But overall, great job.
Thank you guys. Really nice job. I'll second Chris's comment on your presentation quality was top notch. I appreciate the slides being nice and clean. Not a lot of words and more pictures is always a good thing. So thank you. Great plots as well. So a couple of questions just on you're trying to balance going a long distance and efficiency in cruise with landing and taking off on short runways. So in your wing design, did you guys consider slats or other drag devices for landing, and why did you go down that route and just choose the flat that you did?
I'll defer the question to Jordan.
So yes, we did consider slats and stuff like that, but we found out that it would put too much drag, during our cruise phase, because it would put too much drag during our cruise phase. So that's why we did not put them on.
Okay. And then I guess the same question on things like spoilers. Did you consider spoilers for the landing?
For landing,
as a drag device?
We did not consider spoilers because, as you can see, we can land in that 5,000-foot runway.
All right. For your engines specifically, so you went with the traditional design to mount your engines at the back of the aircraft. Did you do any sort of analysis considering different locations for your engine, and why did you end up placing the engines where you did?
I'll hand that question to Allie.
First we kind of looked at business jets. Most of them do have them on the empennage, so that was kind of a head in the right direction. After that, we looked at the benefits and the not so good things of having them on the empennage. And the main reason was that business jets are really low to the ground, and since we have a low wing, our landing gear isn't that tall. our engines would be scraping the ground. So that would be a huge thing. We'd also be taking in like a lot of FOD, which would not be good for our engines. And it's a lot quieter to have them on the back, which is pretty important for a business jet.
Sure. Would you consider top-mounted engines on the wing, similar to like the Honda Jet?
We looked at it for a hot minute and decided no.
Gotcha. All right. So yeah, just one of the main driving factors for doing that on the Honda Jet was noise, cabin noise. So their theory was if you mount them not to the fuselage, it might be quieter. And that was a main design point for that airplane. When you were sizing your vertical tail, did you consider any effects from the engine nacelles potentially blanking the tail, particularly in an engine out scenario?
So I'm a little confused about the blinking part. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
So, at higher angles of attack and potentially with an engine out, you're gonna have some side slip on the airplane, right?
Yes.
So, with that, the engine nacelles look pretty significant, and they may blank, you might get dirty air off of the engine nacelle striking the vertical tail. So did you build any margin into your vertical tail design to account for potentially dirty air coming off?
Yeah, when we did our analysis for our sizing our vertical tail based on our value of C and beta, it has that like sort of factor of safety that's based on the engine out scenario. So if we have a damaged engine that has a bunch of side wash that comes from the engine nacelle when it's damaged, or if we have a high enough side slip so that more side slip more side wash comes off the engine nacelles, it is able to maintain its directional stability.
Okay.
So that is accounted for. Yes.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. Well, thanks. Great job, guys.
Thank you.
Echo what the first two have said. Great job. The presentation is very, very clean and very presentable. And I second the thought of putting the names up there. That's a great idea, so I can relate who's who. So one of my questions is, why did you tighten your load limits, your BN diagram? Why did you bring everything back down to a 2.5 G load?
It's for comfort of the passengers.
So we had the restriction of 3 and then 0.4 for the negative side. And from similar aircraft, we got that 2.5, and that's how we got the -1.
So there are similar aircraft that they go to 2.5?
Right, similar transport aircraft.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what is your actual structural load capability?
So it's 2.5 times the factor of safety of 1.5.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one aspect of that is the more you tighten that up, then actually it kind of reduces your safety margin.
Right.
So when you encounter environmental effects that might be counterproductive to a lower G loading, then you might encounter some problems. So you have to think about that as well, because it might limit your capability to fly all weather or any certain types of environmental capabilities. I noticed that, well, let me ask it this way. What are typical margins that you guys saw between rotation speed and your minimum
Control speed?
control speed? Thank you.
I'll give that question.
Do you mean a margin of safety based on that, or?
Well, so what I noticed is you had rotation speed of 127, I believe,
Yes.
and your minimum controllability speed was 120
knots, yeah.
120 knots. It seems kind of tight, but again, it is a jet. So what were your thoughts on that?
So the regulation for being above minimum control speed on rotation is just so that it's greater.
Right.
And with the 7 knot difference, we do meet that criteria. So it's based on requirements, we do meet that criteria.
Okay. And then on that same thought, your V1 speed was 126, and your rotation speed was 127, correct?
Correct.
So if I lose an engine, will I be able to actually rotate?
Yes.
And so I guess my point is, only 1 knot difference between a V1 and a rotation speed doesn't really give the pilot much margin for.
Right. So V1 is actually not the engine failure speed. It's
Right.
3 seconds after. So that gives the pilot 3 seconds to realize that an engine failure occurred, so then they look at the speed indicator. And the requirement is that it's just greater. And with the thrust we have with 1 engine, we should be able to reach rotation speed and rotate with 1 engine.
Okay. And then the last question that I'll ask is, what design choices allowed you to have the shortest takeoff in the category comparisons? So you guys have a 3,000 foot takeoff roughly, yet the citation, which was the best out of your comparisons, was 3,500. So that's a pretty significant difference in takeoff. Plus all the other benefits that you're touting, it somewhat seems almost like a dreamland to be able to actually achieve that. So what specific design choices allowed you to do that?
For takeoff, or
Well, no, just basically your takeoff distance, takeoff distance.
I'll give,
Sure. Hi there. So one of the major things is I'll go with excessive thrust we have at sea level. So our requirement, as I said, was about 9,000 pounds, and we have installed at sea level about 12,500 pounds. So it's quite a bit more, which does give us the ability to get off really quickly. And our engines are also pretty light for the amount of thrust that they give. So
Okay.
that's my reason.
So the citation essentially would be heavier.
Yes.
All right. That's all I'll go for right now. Great job.
Yeah, great job, guys. This is pretty. I mean, this is awesome. On my end, my questions are going to be far less technical. These guys pretty much take care of everything. I'm sure you can get them with them too. But I'm looking at it from a different perspective. What I always tell my engineers is the fewer questions you ever get during a presentation, the better, which means more information is better as well. So to begin with that, when you guys were saying, here was the RFP, I didn't quite see the RFP, the proposal. Here's what we're shooting for. Here's what we want. Here's what the customer wants. Okay? That's got to be right at the beginning, everything. So that way you're going to say check, 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 check. So these guys can't hit you with anything. And then the other thing is the FAA requirements. And then here's my flight envelope. And I love the fact that some of these plots actually show, okay, here's the requirement and here's where I am. You know what I mean? It just nails it right then and there and shuts everyone down. Because especially if you're trying to design this, especially if you're trying to get money to get designed, and if you want your bosses to fund this thing, I mean, this is a neat little aircraft. But the thing is, though, it's like you have to have all that information in there. I know you're taught to be very technical. We all are. The other thing I really loved about this was when you guys said it's based off, almost existing technology, design. We follow these guys a little bit, and it's always good to do that. One thing they taught us when I used to work at Allied Signal, and your teachers didn't hate me for this, but they said steal shamelessly. I mean, seriously, it's more like they teach you here to be very creative, start from scratch. But in industry, we don't want you to do that unless it's R&D that's government funded. Government funded. And usually, we will kick in some because my company has gone through some of that type of development, okay, and they're usually SBIRs. But at the end of the day, when my guys were going, they're just starting from scratch on stuff. I would just say, hey, steal, even if it's from nature. I mean, we even use that kind of stuff when we were brainstorming because the best adaptation comes from nature. But that said, though, it's like I said, it's great. I mean, everything you do is fantastic. But just a little bit more, let's say, the only thing I would say is dumb it down for some of us, especially your bosses, because that's what they're going to be looking for. Now, if your boss is very technical, you're going to get these kind of questions. But ideally, you want to shut them down before they ask. My guys always run into that. Like when we were doing that thing for, let's say, I'll just use the example of the baseball bat. Louisville Slugger had no clue what their requirements were. They just didn't want to break. On our end, they wanted to design something that was made out of aluminum composite. But what we did was we actually went down the whole route of, here are the requirements as we see them. We're gonna ask the baseball players, of course, what's the customer. But then also, if there's any other kind of rule, like, I'm not sure if they had it for baseball bats, but there's weight rule, coefficient substitution, inertia, et cetera, all these kinds of things, we had to mark them all down. Even if the customer didn't know, we had to do it. And the other one was like a failure modes and effects analysis, you're asking all this stuff about what if. You can actually also do that. I mean, you should do that when you're designing something. All this makes sense? But other than that, sorry to lecture you, but this was all great stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very professionally presented and, again, excellent slides, so my compliments on that. Chris used my best question about airfoil selection, so, but I will go back there one more time. Just maybe something to look into as you go forward towards detailed design. I would take another look at the airfoil, maybe do a little background research in some search phrases such as transonic drag rise, shock-free airfoil design. What I think you'll find is an airfoil like this with that much upper surface curvature between Mach 0.7 and 0.8, it's really hurting you. So I would just encourage you to do a little research into that and see how much a more efficient airfoil at those cruise conditions might change what you have up there. You're meeting the requirements, but it might be an interesting little research for you to see if you could do better with a better airfoil. My last thing is, I'll be brief, how did you calculate your fuel volume? Is that just coming from CATIA?
Our fuel that we originally calculated was in the design point. How much fuel do we need on board? It's 8,900 pounds. And then we just kind of stuck with it. It's in the wings, so we just designed the fuel tanks to be in the wings.
Okay, I would just verify with your design tools that you really do have the fuel volume you believe you have. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.